Today's weather, cloudy skies from coast to coast with a 100% probability of thunder showers. It'll be raining cats and dogs on English-speaking people and nails on French-speaking people, so be very careful out there. Wow, what incredible weather. I'm soaked from Newfoundland to Vancouver Island. Oh, hi, you know me. I'm your country, Canada. In all modesty, I'm one of the biggest, most beautiful, richest countries on the planet. Yes, there are almost 26 million people, 10 provinces, 2 territories, 3 oceans to wash me, 4 seasons, or so they say. Not to mention my 2 official languages. Know what I mean?
French and English, right?
L'anglais, français.
English and French.
Pour moi, c'est le français et l'anglais.
Well, French and English, I imagine.
Yeah. French and Canadian. Or English. Canadian.
Ouais, français, l'anglais.
Isn't it English and French?
Le français et anglais.
That's right, English and French. These are strong points in my unique personality. They're what make me so charming. And I might add, one of the things that makes me very different from my southern neighbor. As a country, I've got the good fortune to be able to express myself in either of these 2 languages. My federal government is committed to providing services to Canadians in the official language of their choice. You see, my Official Languages Act makes English and French the 2 official languages for everything both my Parliament and my federal government do, and it's why I also have a Commissioner of Official Languages. Believe it or not, some people really don't understand how near and dear English and French are to me. I've been hearing these 2 languages for a long, long time. Listen, let me tell you a little story. The story of me. Back when I was just a baby, I had 2 mothers, Britain and France. They blessed me with 2 complete sets of language and culture. And back then, plenty of other people with a wide variety of backgrounds chose to settle in me too. Today, they represent 1/3 of my population and make me a truly multicultural country. A long time ago, explorers roamed up and down my coasts. Among them were John Cabot, who encountered Labrador, and Jacques Cartier, who planted a cross, smack in the middle of Gaspé. Ooh! The explorers got to know my original settlers, the Amerindians. Then they really made themselves at home. They inhabited me. In 1791, when I was still just a young colony, people lived in 2 major areas. Lower Canada, where most of the French lived, and Upper Canada, or Upper Me, where for the most part the English made their homes. One fine day in 1867, my fathers created Confederation. The British North America Act made English and French the 2 official languages of Parliament and the federal courts, as well as of Quebec's courts and National Assembly. And in the last 120 years, relations between my 2 language groups have been marked by both harmony and tension. For example, Manitobans made English and French their official languages. Then, 20 years later, about face, English was made the only official language. On the other hand, in Nova Scotia, where English had been the only language of instruction in schools, new regulations at the turn of this century allowed the use of French from grade 1 to grade 4. And slowly but surely, I began to look and sound like a bilingual country. With my first bilingual postage stamp in 1927. And my first bilingual banknote in 1936. During this time, in fact, way before the creation of labeling legislation, I woke up one morning to a charming bilingual cereal box. Good morning, comment ça va? And boy, did that box get talked about. My federal government established a translation bureau in 1934. And my House of Commons inaugurated a simultaneous translation service. The 60s were a turbulent time in my history. Francophones in Quebec were very concerned about the future of their language and their culture. It was a time of profound social change. It was the Quiet Revolution. Those language tensions nearly tore me apart. In 1963, the federal government created the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism in an effort to go over my language problems with a fine-tooth comb. I was suffering from a bad case of language-itis. Luckily, they caught it in time. A major part of both my Anglophone and Francophone people believed that my language and cultural diversities were two of my best features, and a treasure worthy of safekeeping. Some people keep their treasures under the mattress. Some keep them in museums. And some people like to watch them flourish and grow. We had to find a way to help people get what they were entitled to and to create a better balance between English and French. So, in 1969, Parliament created its first Official Languages Act, the act I mentioned before. My New Brunswick adopted its own legislation, giving equal status to English and French for all matters relating to its legislature. In 1973, my Parliament adopted a resolution giving public servants the right to work where possible in either English or French, striving for equitable participation of the two language groups. Quebec adopted Bill 101 in 1977, making French the official language of the province. However, Quebec retained bilingualism as provided in 1867. In 1982, my Constitution came home, and I received my Charter of Rights and Freedoms, in which English and French were reaffirmed as my official languages, and New Brunswick took the same step. The Constitution declared, among other things, the right to education in one's own official language under certain conditions. Since then, my official languages have become stronger and stronger. English and French have been recognized as official languages of the government and the Legislative Assembly of the Northwest Territories since 1984. The Yukon followed suit in 1988. In 1985, the Supreme Court re-established the equal status of both languages in Manitoba's legislature and its courts. Following a decision along the same lines in 1988, both Alberta and Saskatchewan adopted certain language provisions.
Je pense que les francophones sont en danger de, je pense, voir leur statut relégué à un statut plutôt folklorique ou un statut vraiment de classe inférieure. Et puis je pense qu'il faut qu'ils se donnent à l'heure actuelle les moyens, non seulement pour survivre, mais pour vivre ici en Alberta.
Mais c'est épuisant continuellement demander. C'est beaucoup plus facile d'arriver puis de parler en anglais parce que tu l'as tout de suite, puis c'est 2 minutes, puis c'est fini. Puis c'est ça le danger. Qu'on prenne la voie la plus facile et puis qu'un jour on se réveille et puis qu'on est disparu, quoi.
Thanks to a 1986 law, Ontario's francophones can be served in their language by government institutions and the courts in designated areas. In the same year, Quebec's Bill 142 gave the Anglophones of that province the right to health and social services in English under certain conditions. In 1988, a new Official Languages Act was adopted. The act more strongly reaffirms the equal status of English and French. The majority of my provinces and territories now recognize at least a certain status for both languages in addition to their place in education and criminal justice.
There are two founding groups and organizations, and I think it's important that there be two languages.
Moi, je trouve que vraiment, on est plutôt chanceux d'avoir 2 langues officielles.
Two official languages seem to kind of split a country, whereas one will kind of unite it a bit more together.
Je serais content qu'au Québec, ça se passe en français, l'affichage et tout.
I don't know. I think it should be all English.
Mais on ne devrait pas mettre trop d'emphase sur juste seulement une langue à une place, une autre langue dans l'autre. Ça devrait être uniforme partout.
It shows that Canada is really multicultural.
Si on peut vivre en harmonie dans les deux sociétés, tant mieux.
It gives more character to being a Canadian.
All my citizens have the right to be served in the official language of their choice when dealing with federal government institutions where there is a significant demand. Just think of Canada Post, Parks Canada, Via Rail, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Revenue Canada, or any other department or agency of the Canadian government. All their publications and key documents are published in both my official languages. To provide these services properly, some of my public servants must be bilingual. After all, the customer is always right? Of course, this doesn't mean that all public servants have to be bilingual. Nowhere in the Official Languages Act does it say that individual Canadians must be bilingual either. The 1988 Act reaffirms the equal status of English and French in federal institutions, the right of the majority of public servants to choose their language of work, and the equitable participation of both language groups. It also seeks to promote full recognition of both these languages and to stimulate the vitality of my two official language communities. The Commissioner of Official Languages is appointed by Parliament for a 7-year term to see that the Act is respected and to promote my official languages. This Commissioner is 3 commissioners in one. First of all, the Commissioner as a language ombudsman protects the individual. Any of my citizens and federal public servants who feel their language rights are not being respected can file a complaint with the Commissioner's offices or with the liaison officer. Every complaint is treated with complete confidentiality. The Commissioner's office examines each case, gathers relevant information, and communicates its recommendations to the federal department or agency involved so that it may remedy the situation. The 1988 Act strengthens the Commissioner's powers. Canadians who lodge a complaint with his office regarding denial or violation of their language rights and are not satisfied with how the complaint is settled can take the matter to the federal court. The Commissioner can either appear with or on behalf of the complainant. The Commissioner is also a linguistic auditor. Now, that doesn't mean he's there to correct the way you speak. Rather, that part of the job is to make sure that each federal institution is providing its services adequately in both languages. Following a checkup, the Commissioner can ask the organization in question what action it intends to take following his recommendations. The Commissioner may also prepare special reports describing the state of the language situation in federal organizations. Finally, the Commissioner is a promoter of language equality, promoting goodwill and understanding between the two language communities and traveling me from sea to sea to be in touch with groups, individuals, and provincial and territorial government leaders on the subjects of language reform and the fair treatment of both official language groups. Even though he's 3 commissioners in one, he can't be everywhere at once. He's backed up by a full team in Ottawa and in 5 regional offices, and by part-time liaison officers located all across me. Liaison officers may be contacted via the regional offices.
As you have just seen, the new Official Languages Act sets out more clearly the duties of federal institutions and the rights of citizens. In so doing, it enhances the equality of status of English and French. It also provides for close cooperation between the federal and provincial governments to support the English and French linguistic minority communities, and commits the Government of Canada to fostering full recognition and use of these languages in Canadian society. These measures are very important. Our official language minority groups need our understanding and our help. Although they are not subject to the Act, the private and voluntary sectors also have an important role to play in meeting the needs and aspirations of both language communities. Essentially, what the Act proposes is a linguistic social contract based on justice, tolerance, and mutual understanding. In seeking to establish equality, the Act makes allowances for the particular characteristics of minority groups. The Act cannot but have cultural and even economic implications. The Commissioner and his staff are at the service of all Canadians to help them know their rights and to defend them when necessary. However, the best of laws have little effect without the active participation of citizens, including, of course, public servants, in ensuring their full implementation. It's worth the effort After all, having two official languages is one of the things that makes Canada what it is.
And that's not all. Each spring, the Commissioner presents an annual report to Parliament. This tells members of Parliament and the public about the progress of language reform. The Standing Joint Committee on Official Languages, made up of members of the House of Commons and the Senate, studies the report, calls witnesses, and makes recommendations to the government. The Commissioner publishes a magazine, Language and Society, along with a full range of information material aimed at young people, the two official language communities, public servants, and Canadians in general. It's terrific to have an Official Languages Act and a commissioner to watch over it, but I love knowing what Canadians really think about it all.
Official languages are French and English, so they should be keeping it alive. The government should be more involved in it than what they really are.
L'effort est là. Je ne crois pas que c'est au maximum de ce qu'on pourrait avoir, mais du moins c'est un pas en avant.
C'est confortant de savoir si on veut aller au gouvernement fédéral, on peut toujours parler en français.
Thing, and we have to decide if it's socially worth the cost or not.
Recent surveys confirm that a large majority of Canadians think favorably of my two official languages. More than anything, it's young Canadians who really give me hope.
It's very important to know more than one language.
Apprendre des langues, c'est fascinant, c'est super.
I think it's really neat.
Their parents, even though they often speak only one language, are mostly in favor of second language training. After all, look at the enormous expansion and popularity of immersion programs. Although I must tell you, I had a little trouble with that term at first, until someone explained.
My son's in the French immersion program, and we don't speak French at home, but I don't think it hurts him any. I think it'll benefit him in the end.
Si je pense que c'est une bonne chance de parler plus d'être bilingue.
It's better to have more languages than just one, you know.
Parce que je l'aime.
I've got a terrific language future, don't you think? We've moved a long way, but there's still the occasional sour note. When my two language groups are in conflict, I feel doubly alone. But when they connect and start to listen to each other, I'm twice as happy. As a country, I feel privileged to have two languages at my disposal. I can communicate with about 50 countries in English and with more than 30 in French. I can do business, travel, learn, and grow. Personally, I see a lot of advantages. How about you?
Oh, beaucoup d'avantages.
Well, they can work anywhere in Canada.
T'as des débouchés plus avantageux.
Such wonderful exposure to different cultures that way, and Canada has a lot of them.
L'éducation, l'économie, ça s'impose de plus en plus.
If people stop making a fuss about it, I think we'd be just fine.
I think Canada benefits from it internationally in a lot of other ways, intellectually too.
It's easier for people from other countries to adapt.
C'est pas nous. Quand on est dans sa langue, on vit dans sa culture.
Well, it looks like the rain's letting up. The clouds are starting to go away. And the sun's beginning to shine through. It'll rain again. Cats and dogs on English-speaking people, and nails on French-speaking people across Canada. And I'll still be talking about my two official languages. And I'll keep right on singing in the rain.